Hi there, my name is Cyrus and I'm the host of the PAN podcast. Welcome. This is the second part of my conversation with Dr. Luke Wilson. Among many other great things, Luke is a general practitioner and a co-author of the massively successful randomized controlled weight loss trial called the Broad Study. If you haven't watched the first part of our conversation yet, I encourage you to go back and do so. And if you don't know what the Broad Study is, no worries, we've got you covered. Check out our 3-part deep dive into the super interesting and highly clinically relevant trial. But for now, I'm very honored to bring to you for a second time Dr. Luke Wilson. Let's talk about the Broad Study then. This is, you've just touched on the fact that this is really helpful information. And I think we need more and more research to show, to the medical community, this is really necessary. We try to practice evidence-based medicine, which is, I think, a very, very good way for medicine, going away from eminence-based medicine, just people who have worked in medicine for a long time and just believing whatever they say, towards evidence-based medicine. I think the study that you've co-written, the Broad Study, is an incredible piece of evidence-based medicine. It's a randomized control trial over a quite long period of time as well. So let's talk about it. It's when you published this in 2017, it was the most successful weight loss trial. I don't know whether it still is, but the most successful weight loss trial without mandating regular exercise and without caloric restriction. So this is already, maybe for some people, this poses the question: so how did people lose weight if they don't restrict energy intake, or if they don't lose weight? Or if they don't mandate exercise, how do people lose weight? So let's talk about the Broad Study. What exactly did you do, and how did let's first, so that people, I would actually advise everyone to read the Broad Study. It's possible to download it for free. You publish it in Nutrition and Diabetes, which belongs to the Nature Publishing Group, so that's why it's free to download for everyone. So I would encourage everyone to do that. So how did it come about? How did you decide to do a weight loss study in the community as well? And there are so many interesting things which we can all talk about. It's a really, really interesting study. So let's get into it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. How did it come about?
So if we go back to, when I first found out about the China study and when I was reading that, I obviously had friends at medical school, and before I passed it on to them, obviously I wanted to do my own research and everything around it, and make sure that it wasn't just something that was, like I said before, too good to be true. And so once I'd done all that, I started to tell, my friends about it. Would be the first people, and I sort of, again, it was that kind of, check this out. What do you guys think? Can you see any issues with this? Or does it seem legit, if you like, to you guys as well? And so my two of them, my friend Nick and my friend Matt, who I was at medical school with, both looked at it and read it and were both really interested in it. And so they became, over time, everyone of us became more or less plant-based. And so when we ended up finishing medical school, we decided that the three of us would all apply for the same place. So in New Zealand, once you finish, you do another year or two in the hospital, but there's only so many hospitals here and there's that many medical students. And so you basically have to apply for which hospital you'd like to go to. And Matt had been on a few surfing trips to Gisborne, and we knew that it had really good weather and also a decent Māori population, which would have been interesting as well for us to learn a bit of the Indigenous language of New Zealand and everything. And so we all decided that we'd put in for Gisborne. We'd all been at different medical schools. Otago Medical School sends you to either, you can stay in Dunedin, which is where you start off, or you go to Christchurch, which is where Matt was, or you go to Wellington, which is where I am now, which was where Nick was at the time. And so we thought it would all be, because we'd had about 3 years, we'd been studying in different parts of the country, so we hadn't seen a lot of each other, just keeping in touch online and whatnot. And so we thought it would be neat if we did our first year in the hospital together. So we all applied for Gisborne. And so basically we had this sort of this standard hospital experience. So Gisborne is smallish town, about 30,000 or so population. It's also one of the most socioeconomically deprived areas in New Zealand, and correspondingly it has pretty, more or less the worst rates of lifestyle related disease. So type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, that kind of thing, all are very big issues for Gisborne, if you like. And we would see a lot of the impact of this when we were working at the hospital, and also the complete sort of disconnect amongst not only but the hospital staff, but also the people there, between the of the relationship between sort of food and health. I remember the coronary care unit at the hospital, they had to put a sign up saying, please don't bring in takeaways for your relatives who are in the coronary care unit, because people would, and that was, and still is to some extent, how people would, would think, oh, well, they've had a bad run with their, having a heart attack or something, let's take them some KFC or some McDonald's to cheer them up, or whatever. So they actually had to put that kind of signage up. We would see people come in with, the end stages of the complications of type 2 diabetes, and all of these things we knew to be preventable and reversible. And so I guess the ideas for doing something about it had been there basically from the second that we decided to move up to Gisborne. But it was especially sort of solidified, I suppose, by our experiences in the hospital, which were very much just, what's the analogy that Dean Ornish says? It's sort of like mopping up around the overflowing sink, when the tap or the faucet is still on. So that's kind of how we felt. And we were working really hard too. We were doing, as you do when you first start off, you might be doing 70-hour weeks. You're working sometimes 12 days in a row, and it's all kind of feeling like it's to no great avail. You're not actually helping people. And so Nick, to his credit, somehow found the sort of stamina to actually be looking further into, was there anyone there that we could kind of collaborate with? And he came up with the idea of we should do some kind of research. And so that's kind of where we started out with things. The initial intention of it, because I'd been so interested in cardiovascular disease, we really wanted to replicate what had been done by Dr. Esselstyn or Dr. Ornish. But Gisborne's a smallish place, as I've just explained. And so we ended up, it would have been, too much to have had a study that was just focused on people with, as Dr. Esselstyn had, sort of end stage cardiovascular disease. And so we ended up getting groups of people between the ages of 35 and 70. And the one thing that they had in common was they had an increase in their BMI, or their body mass index. And so other things that they could have were things that we knew would respond pretty well to whole food plant-based nutrition. And so that would be if they also had a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, for example, if they also had a previous history of heart disease, or if they had cardiovascular risk factors, including sort of high cholesterol or high blood pressure. And so those were our criteria for what we ended up doing. And
maybe just a remark here on what you've just touched on. I think this makes, to me personally, this makes the study even more interesting, to see that this is not only a valuable solution for people who have end-stage heart disease, but for the people that you have, for the participants that you had in your study, who are people with elevated cholesterol levels, people with type 2 diabetes, as you've just said, so sort of in the range of a metabolic syndrome, which
Yeah.
applies to many more people than end-stage heart disease. So this, I think was a really interesting thing to see about your study, and also to see maybe, and this is one of the most interesting things to me as well, to see that they were actually able to lower their medication. And this is something that I thought was incredibly interesting. I think around 30%, I think 29% of medication, less medication in the intervention group. So this is sort of applicable to so many people. If you work as a general practitioner, if you work in, I mean, you always see people with this sort of symptomology, with people who are in the range of a metabolic syndrome, people with hypertension, for example, as well. And you can help all of these people who have this this sort of metabolical disarrangement, if you will.
And that's kind of, I suppose that was, it's always been like it's a real advantage of the plant-based dietary pattern or lifestyle, but it's also kind of a disadvantage when it comes to doing research, because you've got to choose, the way that research is done. It's like, it really is designed largely, the perfect thing to be trialing really is a medication, because the medication targets one thing, and you sort that one thing, and you look, that's your primary outcome measure, and so that makes it easy for you to show a difference in things. Whereas when we were doing this, even the name broad, that's when Nick, sort of came up with the name broad from, is the idea of it was there was this range of benefits that people could be achieving through this, and it wouldn't just be one thing. And so, initially, obviously, we were going to look at, cardiovascular disease risk or something like that, but we decided in the end, well, let's make this about, given who we ended up getting in the study, we made it about weight loss as the primary outcome measure, and then we looked at some of the secondary outcomes. But a lot of the stuff, it ends up being a paper, in a research, in a journal. And I just never really think of it like that, because I always just remember all the participants and their stories and how well they did in so many different aspects that you just can't even describe in the data, And so people saying, I remember one lady told us that she went over to visit a sister of hers somewhere out of town, and the sister said, "Oh, what's happened to your you used to be taking this medicine all the time for your back pain." She's like, "Oh yeah, I didn't even realize," but she'd stopped taking, she just didn't need that medicine anymore. And so things like that, which you can't put into, because that's her individual experience, people who were finding, we had a guy who was an avid cyclist, and so he had found that he was able to keep, he started beating some of his friends, and they were wondering, so what he was doing, what his secret was. And so we have those kind of stories where obviously you can't put that into your trial, into your results, sorry, but you get those kind of experiences that people have had, and I think that's really the positive outcome that we had. So we got these amazing results, everyone got the weight loss, but everyone's experience, and you see that in some of the outcomes that we have. So they had increased feelings of like self-efficacy, increased self-esteem, overall sort of feeling better about their health, which I think just shows that there were all these sort of myriad benefits, if you like, of what they were doing, that was so much more than just a loss of weight for so many of these people. And for some of them it was for most of them it seemed to be completely life-changing. And that's sort of what I remember, rather than necessarily all the stats and everything, which of course we can talk about.
No,
that makes some nice reading.
No, I think it's really, sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think essentially, so the program was, in case people were wondering, we basically had people come to us. It was a 12-week program that we did with them, and they'd come to us a couple of nights a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they'd stay with us for a couple of hours when we could get them to. And the attendance was very, very good. And one of the reasons the attendance was very, very good is we wanted to make it about not just why they should be doing this, but actually how they could be doing this.
Yeah.
And so there was a large practical component to it. And so almost every session would have them in a kitchen with a chef who was teaching them how to make plant-based meals. And I think that was also part of the excitement for them, is they would never know, and we would never know because we were all doing this sort of on the fly. So it would be the week before, or the day before or the night before or something, and I'd be busy writing the next slides, and would be, oh, what are we going to cook with them this week or whatever. And so it was always a surprise. They get to cook something new, and they get to take that back to their families as well, which I think was probably a really good sort of reinforcement. If we're going to talk about sort of behavioral medicine or behavioral psychology and things like that, for them was to have this have this food to take home to their family as well, and something to show off for the time that they'd spent. So so we did 12 weeks of that with them, and so half of it was essentially doing the cooking classes rather than demonstrations, which I think was important. And then the other half of the time, most of the time, they would just be getting a talk from us. The idea was to have the talk be about half of that 1 hour or so, and then have sort of a prolonged sort of questions and answers session afterwards. But actually what ended up happening is we got really good interaction with people, and so people would pipe up during the actual presentation and ask us questions or tell their stories and things, and that got better and better as the weeks went on, and everyone got to know each other a bit better and things. And so it just ended up being a really positive community feel, I suppose, about the whole thing. And I think that was really important too in the results that we got, and the ability that people had to sort of stick with things afterwards was that sort of social connection they got from it too. The experience, if you like.
I mean, this is really interesting to hear from you, because I have, as I said before, I've read the study, and I've done these videos about the study as well, because I think that the study's so
I need to watch those videos.
Yeah, I mean, so this is
send me the links or something.
Sure, of course, I'll send you the links. So I started doing these study telegrams. So just talking about individual studies. I started doing this back in maybe like 10 months ago, 9 or 10 months ago. I started with a systematic review meta-analysis on coconut oil, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then I needed to do the broad study, because I thought that still think it's one of the most interesting things that everyone should really read when it comes to evidence-based medicine. So I wanted to record a video of about 8 minutes. And I wrote a script, and I ended up recording 20 minutes. So I was able to cut this into 3 videos, and I was able to release 3 videos on the broad study, because I wanted to talk about some of the details in the study as well.
Awesome.
Such as, for example, lowering medication, or the self-efficacy part, or the quality of life. I think there are so many different gems in there, so many interesting little things in the study. But I think so definitely encourage people to read the study, because there maybe just some of the things that I found were super interesting. The being able to eat at libitum, right? People could eat as much as they wanted to, which is insane. Usually people have to eat smaller portion sizes. They have to count calories. They also didn't count calories in the broad study. They were able to eat as much as they wanted to. It was just that you have this really simple traffic light system as well. You had green food, yellow or orange foods, and then you had red foods, which were to be avoided at best. But they also didn't have to write. They didn't have to write dietary, sort of diaries. They were just able to eat, with that very simple traffic light system. They were able to eat as much as they wanted to, and then you had these courses. And maybe just, let's talk about these. I would be super interested to hear about as you've just started doing it, to hear more about your personal experience and what you think was interesting and important, but what you couldn't put into the paper, because people can read the paper. And then let's talk about these things that you think were really interesting, but that you couldn't put into the paper. But maybe let me say 2 or 3 things that I think we should really say for people who are listening. So this is the weight loss that you've achieved with this dietary intervention was similar to bariatric surgery, which I think is incredible as well. It's as effective as bariatric surgery when it comes to weight loss, but without the surgery, basically. And it's also a long-term behavioral change. So the intervention lasted 12 weeks, but you measure people at 3 months. So after these 12 weeks, you measured their weight loss and their BMI and all these measurements at 6 months, and then again at 12 months. And this was a prolonged weight loss. People still lost weight from 3 to 6 months, and they kept the weight off after 12 months.
After 12, yeah.
Which shows that was actually behavioral change, and that people were able to adapt this diet in their life. This was not a clinical setting, it was a community setting. So this is actually adaptable for people in a real life setting. And maybe just one of these gems was that, and you were able to put this in the study as well, that one of the participants had to stop taking insulin because he became hypoglycemic, right?
Yeah,
and 2 other people got rid of their diabetes when measuring A1C. So measured with A1C, they got rid of their diabetes, which is the reversal of a condition which we regularly see as chronic and as not reversible. But this is, I mean, these are just some of the things that I thought were the highlights within the study, and there's so many of them. But maybe just to mention a few, which really made this incredibly enjoyable to read, and just also enjoyable to not only enjoyable but incredibly helpful and empowering to have this knowledge, to know that you're actually able to help people with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. There were a lot of like you've really given a really good summary of basically some of the more exciting results that we got, I would say. And again, sort of going back to the example of the gentleman who managed to who all of a sudden his insulin dose was too much for him. The funny thing about that was he had previously been described by his GP as a difficult to control type 2 diabetic, and we basically needed to go to the general practice that we're working with, and we chose just to work within one general practice, which is a very good idea, I think, for an initial study. And we had to actually talk to the general practitioners about how and when they could take people off medications, because it's just not something that they knew how to do. And so he could have come off his medication a lot more quickly. Happened to be a forestry worker, so not the best thing to be up sort of swinging around a chainsaw and that kind of thing when you're going hypoglycemic. And so realistically, it was a very interesting thing to be a part of from a practical perspective, because he was saying to us, I'm starting to feel dizzy, and this was within a week or two of starting the program. And so we knew exactly what it was, and with our experience with Dr. McDougall and everything too, and so we knew what to do about it. But from the general practice perspective, this just never happens, so it's not something that they have to deal with usually. And so eventually I think we got the general practitioner to agree to halve the dose of insulin. Then not too long after that, the GP got enough confidence to say, well, why don't we just stop the insulin and see what happens? And of course he did really well, of course, as we knew he would. And he a really nice other aspect that you don't see in the study, for example, published, was that this guy, being a forestry worker, he used to have a heavy vehicle driver license that got taken away from him once he needed the insulin, because there's too much risk if you're driving a heavy vehicle. And so once he had stopped his insulin, he was able to get that back again, and so that made a big difference to him as well, and to his so and again, something I remember, this particular guy, when we first, because a lot of these people didn't really know what they'd signed up for, and so you can just imagine. And when we did, the sad thing is we did record this. We recorded like the whole. We were hoping that we would get some funding to do a sort of a documentary or a TV show out of it, or something like that. Which again was probably some of this naivety of being young and everything. But so we did all that, and we got some decent footage. But then the footage got lost and things, and we've still got bits and pieces of it. But I wish that I could show, I could show what some of these people's faces looked like on the first day when we started going through, well, this is what you're actually going to be doing, this is what the diet is. And this particular gentleman, when we announced, because people had their questions, and one of the questions was, well, if it's plant-based, can we still have cheese? And we're like, no, you can't have cheese. And I just remember seeing this guy, and his arms just went like this, you could just see, he just crossed his arms, and you could just see that he was not happy to be part of this. So that's the funny thing. And so some of the people who you could tell right at the start were the absolute most sort of staunchly against this, thought it was never going to work, and they're like, what on earth have we got ourselves in for? They actually ended up getting some of the best results and ended up being the real sort of champions and the advocates, because obviously you've got someone that's come off insulin. To the rest of the participants, this seems like an absolute miracle. And so those people were able to give their story and how it's affected them, and that encourages the other ones, and so on and so forth. And and I imagine it probably changed a lot of how that particular general practice was practicing, and what they started thinking was possible as well. So there were lots of sort of positives coming from it that go beyond the scope of what we ended up writing about in the paper.
Yeah. This is incredible to hear. I mean, this goes to show, maybe from the example that you have just laid out, from that one person, from the forestry worker, that he got his license, for example, back for driving heavy vehicles. This is not something that only influences your diet and how, that you're losing weight. I think changing this dietary pattern towards a plant-based, toward more of a wholesome plant-based diet changes so many different aspects in your life. And so many really, really cool things can happen for you, as for example, with this person who's now able to actually perform his job the way he would like to perform his job.
Yeah.
And this has such an influence on his psychology as well, on his quality of life, how he feels, and how he can conduct himself, and how he can live his life the way he would like to, without the restrictions of such a limiting disease that diabetes sometimes is, and also with the health consequences that we know later come from having type 2 diabetes. I mean, if you can reverse this, how powerful is this? This is what we really, I think, what a lot of people also in medicine would like to sign up for, more likely than just prescribing insulin.
I think so. I think there's some people get into medicine, and so a lot of the stuff that there is in some of the documentaries, and I think they're American documentaries, right? And so they like to play up this, it's the drug industry, and all of the doctors are in cahoots with the drug industry. And it's like, the reality is that people get into medicine because they actually want to help people. The vast majority of people that do medicine get into it because they feel like it's the best thing that they can do in order to help other people. And so when doctors and other health professionals realize that this is what's possible, then that's exactly what they're going to do. And so we have the constraints of the system in place, as we've talked about earlier, but I think it's such a positive way of practicing, and the patients, the people that you work with are just so grateful for it, and you can see how life-changing it is for them, that it will be, and it is already being more and more something that more and more health professionals are interested in practicing. And it's not a case of we're all just interested in pushing drugs at all. It's just about everyone that I've met is first and foremost interested in helping patients. And so it's just a matter of showing them how it can be done. And that was really one of the main aims that we had with the Broad program, was to be something that demonstrated. So we had, you will have done this, is you have journal clubs within sort of the hospital teams and things. So our general medical journal club we would always sneak in with, oh, here's Dr. Ornish's study, or here's, and so they would listen and be respectful of it. And they would say, though, oh, look, this was done in the United States, and in Ornish's study, for example, oh, they got all their own meals made for them and things.
Yeah.
And there's just no way that would happen in Gisborne. It wouldn't work here. The people here are different, and we're, it's a different situation here. And so it's all well and good to say this, but people actually aren't going to do it. Yeah. And so one of our main sort of goals behind the broad program, I think, was really to show, actually, no, people will do this. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We just need to enable them to do this, and a lot of people will make this choice, because they'd rather do this. And you can get the idea from some of the stories we've discussed already. But they want to take control of their health. They want to be, they want to be doing well with this. They don't want to be taking medicines. And that's the interesting thing as well, is that even in general practice nowadays, I find it really tricky to give someone, I'll say to them, oh, look, your blood pressure's a bit high. What do you think? Do you want to take a medication? And it's like, no. Nobody. There's very, very few people who want to take a medicine for anything. I'll tell you what. So like it's always, which suits me just fine. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, this is what we can do instead. Go away and see what you can do. And and we take it from there. So it's not like people have their hands out asking for medications, and it's not like doctors necessarily want to give them the medications. It's just I think one of the issues, particularly in general practice with my colleagues that I work with now, is that they have this experience of years and years and years of, they think, giving people the right advice, which is like, oh, go away, lose some weight, which of course doesn't work really. And then the people not doing that, and so then eventually them needing to take medication anyway. So some of them are like, well, why bother with that time? We might as well just put them on medication right away and save everyone the hassle. And so that's kind of the issue that we're up against now. But the idea of the broad program and study was really just to give that, to show people it could be done, and it could be done in Gisborne. And if it could be done in Gisborne, New Zealand, which certainly isn't the most resourced and most sort of, the easiest place to do it. It's not like we have big Whole Foods, organic supermarkets with your salad bars and your ready-made meals and all that kind of thing. And
California,
it's not like that at all. Like, it's a very different situation from Santa Rosa, California, where we'd been involved with Dr. McDougall and his participants. So it's a completely different situation there.
That's so powerful. I think this is so a couple of observations here. I think maybe just first of all, for people who haven't read the study yet, this is coming back to the insulin patient, the forestry worker. This is not a low carb diet, quite to the contrary, right? This is a sort of a low fat iteration of a whole plant-based diet. So this, without wanting to get into this whole diet wars of low fat versus low carb, this just goes to show that it's not about again, coming back to our point about reductionism, this is not about a single nutrient. This is about a dietary pattern. This is about, eating predominantly whole plant foods, and then good things are going to happen in different systems within your body. Different organs will benefit from this, and your whole system will benefit from it. This is why, as you've mentioned, it's a little bit more difficult to get these things down in a study and to decide on which parameter you want to look at, because so many different parameters change. But it's pretty much, there are very few patients who won't benefit from a whole plant-based diet. Maybe if you're completely insulin resistant after having had type 2 diabetes for maybe 20 years and your pancreas is just completely tilted and doesn't produce any insulin any longer, maybe then there might be a benefit of a lower carbohydrate diet. But in general, for the vast majority of people, this dietary pattern is beneficial, which you've been able to show. This is why I think it's so interesting that you didn't have this very narrow group of participants, but as the study also, you can use the word in a different sense. You also had a broader spectrum of participants in the study as well.
Well, that was, and I mean, I think that is something that people don't necessarily realize without delving into the paper a little bit, like you have, obviously. And so it is pretty cool that we had people that, usually within medicine, it's like, oh, there's this, you've got kidney disease, you need to eat this way. Oh, you've got type 2 diabetes, better cut out those carbs. You've got heart disease, oh, it has to be this or that for you. And so there's different diets for every different condition. Whereas in this situation, there was no difference. Everyone was given the same prescription. Everyone had different health issues. And, the one thing in common, obviously, was the increased weight. But other than that, everything else,
Yeah.
it worked for them. It didn't matter that this person had diabetes and that they were going to be eating a diet that was probably 80% carbohydrate, and it didn't matter for the people with heart disease that they were going to be eating this way, or whoever. So I think that was one of the things that kind of came out of necessity of us having a smallish group. That in a smallish group to choose from in the end is that we did get people that were quite different people and had quite different health concerns, but it all ended up being very beneficial for them. And that was something that unfortunately was always going to be something difficult to express when you're writing something for a journal, because they want to see, again, you've got to fit in this paradigm, which is, okay, what is it that your intervention is targeting? And so we had to say, well, we were targeting, increased BMI, and we were going for weight loss, but we weren't really. I mean, that was enabled us to get it published. But what we were really trying to do was get 30 or so people, get them excited about whole food, plant-based eating, and change their lives, and that's for some of them, that's certainly what happened.
I mean, this is again, a couple of observations. I think this is super empowering because diet is often seen as such a difficult thing to grasp. Sometimes people have the opinion or have the impression that they need to, which is certainly helpful in some cases, but you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours on end to understand what a healthy diet is. There is this dietary pattern of eating mainly unrefined plant foods that is beneficial for the vast majority of people. So this is, I think, super empowering to understand, because then as a medical doctor, and I think you've laid that out perfectly, I have the same impression. People who go into medical school, people who get into medicine, they primarily would like to help people. They don't get in there. I think as you said it so perfectly. I think some of these documentaries, especially from the United States, they're sometimes also a little bit difficult for me to watch because they're just too much on the nose. They're trying to portray this image of medical doctors being tied to the drug industry all the time and just trying to push pills. This is not how I experience medicine. I experience medicine, or people who work, health professionals. They're very, very kind people who would like to mostly help their patients. So I think this is so empowering because it's easy. The basic knowledge that you were bringing forth with the broad study is easy to understand, and it's very practical. You've also shown that it's practical in the community, and you can actually help your patients with that. So it's just a win-win situation, both for health professionals as well as for patients, which I think makes this, honestly, I think, in my opinion, a must read for all medical students, for all health professionals, really, to see that this is possible. You've opened up so many possibilities with that study. And I think even honestly, in a more empowering way, to me at least, than the Ornish study, which had some, was a lifestyle intervention study, and people had these prepared meals and they had this very specific setting. But the broad study that you have done is was in a community, as you said, with a low socioeconomic background. From a regular general practitioner, you have these participants from regular general practitioners, so it's in a real life setting, very applicable.
And that's how we wanted it to be, really, to be honest. And so I do think that's really one of the more powerful aspects of it. Is it just ended up being, it's very real, it's it feels very much like it was genuine. And so that's what I think is really cool about the results being what they were, managing to get those amazing results with the weight loss for people. So I think, given the fact that it wasn't like we had them, we'd experienced obviously the situation of Dr. McDougall, where you've got 10 days where you're in a nice hotel and they're cooking the meals for you and everything, and you just eat the food and don't, go to your lectures and things, and you lose the weight and things. And we'd experienced True North where you're essentially locked down. So before that even became cool, that's what Goldhammer and Lyle have been doing for 30 years or so, we think. And so those situations, and one of the things that, because I kept in touch with a lot of the people from those programs, and it was always very difficult for them to go back home because they've changed, their entire life's changed, but their friends haven't. Their cupboard's probably still exactly the same as when they left. And so they're all of a sudden back in this environment where I suppose it's always the travel thing, isn't it? You go away, you have an amazing experience overseas or something, your life has changed, you come back, and then all your friends and everything like that, what have they been up to? Or just the same things pretty much. And so it's very easy just to fall back into that same situation. And so I think having the people just for those couple of hours twice a week, it managed to kind of be more a part of their lives, I suppose, part of the everyday life, rather than being one of those kind of like vacation or holiday like experiences where you go and you do something that's a bit strange, then you come back and you go on with your normal day-to-day life. And we did see, when I was at the McDougall program and when I was at True North as well, you'd see repeat customers, and so I was always kind of conscious of that and wanted to make sure that if we did something, then it was going to be more likely to be something that could be sustained in the long term. And, no doubt there'll be people, it's been 6 years now, and I imagine if I was to go back up there and track everyone down, there'd be a group of people who had gone back more or less to what they used to do. There'd be a group of people who were still doing it really hard out and still benefiting from it, and then be a group of people sort of in the middle that were doing a little bit, and they'd certainly changed from where they used to be, but they'd sort of gone back. And a lot of that has to do with environment and social pressures and so forth, and things that we have very little control over. And I guess in a way, one thing that I always say with lifestyle intervention, I'm like, why are we so hard on ourselves with this? Like, because there's never been a situation where we say to people, oh, just take this cholesterol pill for 3 months, and then after that, sort of take it if you feel like it, but we're not going to make sure that you're still taking it or anything. And so the intervention should be something that's long term. It doesn't need to be, there's no weakness in this being something where they have regular get-togethers again, or every now and then you maybe have sort of like a booster program, which I guess maybe some of the people at True North or McDougall were doing for themselves. There's no weakness in that. If we put someone on one of these medications, they're expected to take that every day for the rest of their lives, and so and the associated costs and everything that go with that are paid for by whoever, the patient or the health system, again, for every day for the rest of their lives. One of my friends here with the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine was saying the approximate health cost for someone to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes is about $3,000 on the health system a year. So you can imagine these people that we managed to get off their medication or become no longer having type 2 diabetes with the broad program, the saving to the health system is, for every year that they're around. So maybe every now and then you throw some of that back and you do another program, or you do a catch up with people or something like that. So I think we need to get over this idea that our interventions have to be time limited, because life isn't like that, and nothing else in medicine is. Maybe a surgery. But even
Yeah.
that,
But even with bariatric surgery, we don't, and I think you've touched on that in the study actually, that we don't have that long-term data when it comes to bariatric
no,
surgery, and it's more,
no.
they're more likely to do these studies with a healthier group of patients when
Oh
it comes
yeah.
to bariatric surgery. So the data on bariatric surgery isn't that good, and we
No.
have to. I mean, we know. I mean, I've been in the operating room once for bariatric surgery. It's a huge surgery. I mean,
Mm.
this is not a small thing. You take out a big part of an organ. Even if you have one of these fancy operating machines, these Da Vinci operating machines, this is still a massive operation. So I think if you can somehow avoid this, and if you can change your lifestyle and have similar or even better results in the long
Yeah.
term, then that's definitely something that we should be striving for. And also with these
Mm-hmm.
costs, I think there's so many hidden costs as well. And even if the lifestyle intervention was, I think we're sometimes a bit short-sighted with the costs. Even if a lifestyle intervention was even costly, which don't know necessarily whether it is, we still have to understand that people, that treating people is costly as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about planetary health, for example, I think we need to understand that the medical system also has its toll on for example, carbon dioxide emissions. So
Yeah. Yeah.
taking all this into consideration, and even many more things, I think there's so many pros on the lifestyle intervention side.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like we were talking about before, we're not just addressing these people's type 2 diabetes. We're not just addressing their, them being overweight or obese. We're addressing their heart disease risk. We're addressing their risk of numerous other conditions as well. We reduce their risk of getting gout or kidney problems, or needing a surgery for a hip replacement or something like that in the future. And we're improving their psychological health as well,
Mm.
by increasing their self-efficacy and making them feel good about themselves as well. So we're improving their microbiome. I think a lot of the time, my feeling is that the research is just catching up. And so the research always says the same thing, more or less, is eat more plants.
Yeah.
But we just find hundreds of different ways of saying it now. It's because, you should eat lots of plants because they've got fiber, so it's good for your microbiome. But realistically, people like Dr. McDougall, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, Dr. Clapper, Dr. Goldhammer, these guys have been saying this for years, and they didn't know that it was because of this or that, or it was because of TMAO or whatever. We've got all these fancy things that we're coming out with now, that all these extra reasons, but in the end the prescription stays the same. And even though this was done now 6-7 years ago, is there anything that I would change about the actual prescription of the diet? No, not really. It would probably be almost exactly the same as what we did with those categories. I really haven't changed them much at all in that whole time.
Yeah, maybe just at least with a newer meta-analysis on nuts, maybe you could throw 30 grams of nuts in there. But as you just...
Well, that's the thing, is they were very upset because Gisborne, like, it's a great place for growing things. So it's perfect. It really is perfect for plant-based up there. And so one of the things that they all were very upset about, or disgruntled by, was the fact that avocados were also out, because they're just like growing on the trees and falling on the footpaths up in Gisborne. That there's so many of these things just growing up there that people don't know what to do with them. So but I think, to be honest, like that is the reason that we got the weight loss results that we did, though, is that we stuck with an Esselstyn style, low fat. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do that as well, not only because, we were going to have people within that group that had cardiovascular disease, and for them, that could make all the difference between them having a heart attack or not, at least from what we know from Dr. Esselstyn. But also because if you learn to cook and make tasty meals without these kinds of things in them, then it's very easy now to use those things as like a garnish, or to make it a little bit tastier. once you've already learned that. But if you haven't, I remember when I was vegetarian, for example, and I think almost you can go get yourself into a situation where you're actually worse when you're a vegetarian than if you're omnivorous, because when you're vegetarian, you're making a real effort to use a lot of cheese, for example, to make everything taste really nice. You use cheese on everything, or you use eggs and everything, and so you're actually having these high fat, high cholesterol foods that we know aren't particularly good for us, and you're relying on those a lot of the time for the flavor of things or to make things tasty. And I think with plant-based or veganism, people can end up relying a bit too heavily on things like avocados, nuts and seeds, tofu, that kind of stuff to make things tasty. And so it was kind of I think it was an interesting little experiment for the participants, and their taste buds would have changed during that time as well, so that they're not craving those kinds of things as much. And so I think that really was part of the reason. I don't think that you would get, and intriguingly, I think it was Dr. Barnard, or the folks at PCRM recently did something where they compared plant-based to like Mediterranean or something, and they got some pretty good weight loss results. But they didn't get the kind of weight loss results that we got. And if you actually look at the numbers, those people they're still hitting about 20% calories from fat, even though it's a low fat diet, and if you listen to any of the pioneers on whole food plant-based, 20% is not where they'd put they would say maybe 10, maybe even below, maybe even 8 to 15% fat is sort of where they're at, without getting too much into macronutrients. But it certainly does make a difference, I think, for your weight loss results, if you're able to separate those things out a bit, if you want to get absolute maximum weight loss, because then you don't get basically you don't get sort of the only way that the body can make the fat really is from de novo lipogenesis, which we know is very inefficient. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we got the results that we did.
And the results are striking. I mean, this is maybe just to come back to the point. I think you said that twice now, that it's people, the outcome that was most prominent was just the weight loss. But I mean, weight loss is incredibly important. So many people are overweight. I think about 40% now. The WHO states that 40% of people are overweight worldwide. I mean, this is globally. This is taking sub-Saharan African countries into account as well, where people suffer from malnutrition. So globally, 40% of people are overweight. Within high-income countries, that's even worse, and 16% are obese. Children are becoming obese. And we have the Corona pandemic right now, but obesity is an epidemic in many places on the planet as well, especially high-income countries. And I know and New Zealand has an obesity epidemic as well, Germany as well. And really, when we see this in children, I think this is something that we should be concerned with, to say the least, and really try our best to prevent children from becoming obese and suffering from the consequences.
And there has been a paper recently, I only basically saw the headline on it, but it was basically explaining that such a huge amount of the mortality and morbidity from the coronavirus pandemic is due to the obesity that we see in our Western countries. And the other thing too, I just point out about the weight loss is, there's this kind of almost stigma around it, I guess, to some extent, because it's all linked in with sort of that I suppose the weight loss industry and the Biggest Loser TV show and people nowadays kind of getting concerned about people's body image and things like which are relevant concerns. But at the same time, I think what we really found is with our participants, that was what they were able to see happening, and so the weight loss is tangible to them. Us saying something like, hey, your cholesterol's come down, well, it doesn't make them feel any better, and so the thing that people would be noticing was, for themselves, but also the people around them, their whānau, their family, their community. We had a great story from one of the ladies who said, you know, she'd been going to a gym for quite some time, and you know, this is, you know, she was doing this before the study, so, you know, it's not a confounder or anything. But anyways, she went one day, and this lady just came up to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I've seen you've been coming here for quite some time, but I just wanted to say that you're looking amazing, you know, and that you keep it up. You're doing really well." And this is just some stranger she's never met before, never talked to her before, and just comes up and compliments her about how good she's looking. And so that's some really powerful, again, going back to the behavioral principles, that's a really powerful positive reinforcement for people.
Yeah.
And so while it might be tempting to discount the weight loss or kind of say, well, that's superficial and, you know, or whatever, it really does make a big difference for people's self-esteem. And for people, I think in our group, the thing for people was that they had all tried stuff before. It wasn't, and that's a sad thing, right? As we all assume, oh, people just are overweight or whatever because they're lazy and they can't be bothered. But the reality is that most of these people probably are trying more than most,
Yeah.
you know, to actually be doing something about this. And they try all sorts of things and they read all sorts of things, and none of it works, or it works for a little while and then it isn't sustainable, you see. And so all of these people have been trying all this stuff all this time, and then all of a sudden they've got something that actually works and that they feel like they can continue on with because they're not hungry from this. They're eating as much as they like and they can't believe it, and it's miraculous. And so that was kind of the way that it worked out for them. And you could see within the group, I remember that a week or two after they started, because we had a start date and everything, and I just remember just looking around and I was like, said to them, I was like, you guys are all looking really good, you know. And it wasn't just weight loss, it was like actually you could see it in their face. And again, this is something we can't write about, but like the blood flow is improving and they're getting more carotenoids and these substances that are in plants that give your face this kind of radiant glow and everything. And so if only we could have measured the glow, you know. But no, seriously, they just look like healthier people, like literally 1 or 2 weeks into this. I wasn't even just making that. It was like, because I'm pretty bad actually with that. I'm not very good with recognizing people and noticing when there's been changes and stuff. I'm fairly bad at that. But like looking around, I was just like, damn, you know, it is kind of miraculous, and this is pretty cool. These people are all looking so much better, and that was the thing. They really got a lot of reinforcement. That was, you know, they wouldn't be able to tell that their blood pressure was low. They wouldn't be able to tell that, you know, their cardiovascular disease risk was less, and they don't really care about those things as much. They care about how they're feeling, that they have more energy, that they're sleeping better. Again, that's another thing that they were all saying that we couldn't put in the results. You know, they cared that people were noticing that they'd done something, and that they, you know, now were able to fit in clothes that they weren't able to before, that they had to go out and buy new clothes because they were now able to be a weight where that was, you know, they were able to wear more fashionable things or whatever. So it was that stuff that seemed to matter a lot to them. And as health professionals, I think that's often a mistake that we make, is we assume that what's important to us will be motivating and interesting to patients, but a lot of the time it's like they don't really know or care that much about their cholesterol, to be honest. Well, they like it because it's reinforcing for us. So if we go in and we say, hey, your cholesterol's come down, well done, then they're like, oh, nice, the doctor's pleased with me or whatever. But other than that, it doesn't make them feel better on a day-to-day, whereas some of these other more superficial, if you like, things that happened were very important for people.
This is exactly, I think, what at least what I think we as health professionals, you know, maybe not should be striving for, but I think what would make our work and our life also more desirable, our professional lives, if we can really help people see the changes that they feel are impactful in their
Mm-hmm.
lives, that they feel are really. This is so empowering. What you're just saying about the about this specific aspect, that people can actually see the differences that are important to them, that they
Yeah.
actually feel better. And of course, I mean, everyone, this is, we sometimes talk about this as something being superficial, but when you look into the mirror and you see that you look better and healthier, of course you feel better and healthier.
Yeah.
So this is such an important reinforcement. I think what you just talked about, that we sometimes as medical professionals only see the numbers and forget to see the person.
Yeah.
And that you've been able to really help people within their lives. This is incredibly powerful. So where do we take this? How, that's what I mean. You did that study. What did you do? What did you do afterwards? How I mean, you had these miraculous results. You know, okay, I can help people with dietary changes. You saw this at the McDougall program. You read the Ornish publications. You read the Esselstyn publications. You did your own research, which, as I said, I think is even, to me at least, is even more powerful. So what do you do with that? What did you do with it, and how do you think this can be put into practice for other people as well, for other health professionals? And so basically, where do we take it, right? Because now we have this incredible treasure. How do we use it?
Yeah, and I think a large part of it for me was, it kind of gave me sort of almost license to be saying this stuff and to be using this. And so it's a little different to say, if someone challenges you on something, why are you recommending this kind of way of eating or something, to be able to say, oh, well, I've researched it and here's my paper. And you can read all about it. And same for, it doesn't mean that everyone has to do it themselves, but it's nice that there's something there now, at least that, and there's more and more research coming out all the time where people can point to that. But even at the time when we were doing this, there wasn't anything specifically done in New Zealand, and there wasn't as much research on whole food plant-based generally as there has been coming out in the last little while. And the fact that it's still talked about and that you're still interested in talking to me, 3-4 years after we've published, and sort of 6-7 years after we actually did the research, shows that. And it made it into Dr. Greger's book and his presentation and everything last year, I think, too. And so it shows that there's still not a huge amount that's specifically whole food plant-based. And so we often talk in this whole food plant-based community, I suppose, that, we're all evidence-based and there's so much evidence and all the evidence. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at randomized controlled trials done with someone who's actually defining their intervention as whole food plant-based, there's not a huge amount out there. We have to extrapolate from what's been done by, Ornish, which was technically, yes, diet was an important component of that. Initially, maybe had some dairy product in there, some things like that, and then changed it. And the same with Dr. Esselstyn to some extent as well, and then that wasn't randomized and blah, blah, blah. And then Dr. McDougall's been doing his thing for years and years and years, but hasn't really done anything randomized or controlled. So a lot of it has to be, it's all about the converging lines of evidence, and it's about taking that sort of T. Colin Campbell approach where you don't look at things in a reductionist manner necessarily. But I think having something like the broad study behind me, it gives me, it allows me to get onto podcasts like this. So that's been, it's the gift that keeps giving. This time last year, it was, it's my birthday tomorrow, actually.
All right. Cool.
41. So I was in Fiji, presenting at the South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and and then I've also presented on the broad study in Pittsburgh as well, for the American College of Preventive Medicine, and so it's given a lot of opportunity that way for me. But I think what it does generally is it enables us. It just gives us all, I think, something tangible that we're able to show to colleagues, or just to back up what we're actually recommending and what we're doing and things. And so for me, I was kind of a little bit more cautious about how I was being about things until the study was published and everything, because we had been challenged when we were in the hospital in Gisborne specifically. Interestingly, this usually happens by dietitians, not by the doctors.
Okay.
But so, and it seems to happen. A colleague of mine who's actually, a consultant, or that's sort of one of the, he's finished all his training and everything. He's one of the top doctors now. He even managed to get sort of challenged by dietitians on what he was doing in his hospital. Okay. And so it doesn't seem to matter whereabouts you are in the pecking order of things too much. People are going to perhaps come after you, though all of these having been said a few years ago now. And so I think there's a lot more acceptance of this idea at the moment, that people kind of know that this is maybe something that's could be helpful for health. They don't realize the extent that it can be. And they also realize that there's maybe a bit of hype behind it as well. So we've got things like the Game Changers now, which has been really, really helpful as well, getting the word out. It's like our sort of modern day Forks Over Knives, and bringing that to a whole new audience as well. So I think that's really what it has been for me, has been something that I've been able to reflect back on, and being able to, I've never needed to say to it, every now and then I'll say to patients, if they're questioning things, I'll say, we did this in Gisborne and it seemed to work pretty well for the people up there. But I've never had any run-ins with anyone about this or anything to the extent that you think that you might. And so I think that's been useful. So I think it gives us license, and it gives us a prototype, a paradigm. So if anyone that's listening is interested in exactly what we did in more details or anything like that, I'm more than happy to help them, with setting up their own thing, or chat to them about any of that, or send them any of the materials that we used or anything like that. I'm more than happy to do that, because I see this as, it was always, when I went and met these people, when I met Esselstyn and Clapper and McDougall, they were always just giving. They never asked for anything. They never expected me to pay for anything. And I think we're starting to see like a little bit of that creep into the movement now, where it used to just be a very sort of community driven thing, and we were all just doing this for our own, for our own, that's the wrong way to start that off, for the benefit of everyone, and it wasn't anyone's specific property. This was just information that was there, and it belonged to everyone, and everyone was just very free with giving. And so that's kind of what I learned from those people. And I guess it was sort of inevitable that as it became more popular, and now we've got sort of Instagram influencers, and there's perhaps a little bit more sort of personal gain that can be gained from this, and perhaps even people that are starting to make some money from it, which is quite a different situation from how it has been in the past. So
It is, and I think this is. I mean, and we need to wrap this up here in a couple of minutes, because I know that cool. I mean, it's your birthday tomorrow. I've just heard that, and that really, it is 9 o'clock in the morning here in Germany, but I know it's 9 o'clock in the evening in New Zealand. Yeah. And I'm really thankful for your time. But I just want to. I mean, there were two more things that we wanted to talk about, which we didn't even get to. And I mean, if you'd like to,
maybe I can come back on sometime.
You can come on some other time on the podcast.
If people aren't sick of hearing from me,
because you're doing incredible work with you've just talked about this whole monetarization of plant-based nutrition. You're doing really great work with Doctors for Nutrition as well, which is sort of a similar organization to PAN.
Exactly.
NGOs, really organizations that are not in this for monetary gain, but they're just in this to sort of more on a professional level, more on a, not to say that all these people that you've mentioned are not professionals, but I think to have this on a broader level again, to make use of the word for a lack of a better word, to have this on a broader level again, with really health professionals sort of coming together in groups and being able to spread the knowledge. This is really what it's still about, getting the word out. Because even though plant-based nutrition is now more sort of a regular thing and it's been heard by many more people, it's still something that we need to get, where we need to get the knowledge across. So I think your work that you're doing with Doctors for Nutrition, we didn't even get into Two Zesty Bananas, which I think is the most genius name for any organization, for any for anyone that could ever come up with it. I couldn't even believe it. I think your website is so original. It's so cool. So maybe we can talk about this another time, but I think if you could leave people with maybe with people who are listening, with health professionals listening, medical students listening, or medical doctors, what would you say would be sort of the most powerful thing, the most impactful thing they can do in their sort of in their day-to-day, on a day-to-day basis, maybe talking to patients, or talking to people who are interested? What do you think would be helpful advice?
Well, I think the best, that if everyone has their own role that they can play in this, and it's just a matter of finding, what you're good at and what you really have that you can offer. And I think as health professionals, one of the things that we have, that we're fortunate to have, is we have the respect of our patients, and they look up to us, and they have the expectation that we it's become more a thing now where it's not a case of us necessarily looking after the patient as much as it used to be. It's more sort of but at the same time, they don't have the access to the knowledge that we have. They don't have the understanding of health, and that's really the difference that we have, and that's why we have that respect from them. And we also have that respect not only from our patients, but also within the community. And also, even if we're looking at people like that might be able to make high level changes on policy levels, like politicians, they listen to what health professionals have to say. And so I think really, for me, like I've just talked about before, doing something like the broad program and having that published gave me confidence, but what I'd urge you to do is to have the confidence to be able to bring this up in conversations with your patients, and just giving them the information where you can. And I'll give you a story from just last week, and it's so random when this happens that you just don't know. And so one of the things that I'll do for people nowadays is you've probably all seen, Dr. Greger's got his daily dozen. And so that to me is kind of a non-threatening way of saying to people, hey, look at all these things. These are the things that have been researched that seem to be the best for people's health. If you can be trying to get more of these things in, then that's great, And so whenever someone comes in for like a health check with me now, even if it's in sort of my 15, 20-minute consultation that I do at the regular GP, then I'll usually print that out and give it to them. And so I must have done that a few months ago with this gentleman that came back to see me last week, and he said, "Oh yeah, this Dr. Greger, or Dr. McGregor, as I call him," and everyone always gets his name wrong. But my wife got really into that, and so she started, reading all, watching a few of his videos, and then we watched this film called The Game Changers. Have you seen that? And I was just wondering, what do you think about if I was to go plant-based or vegan? And I'm like, well, obviously doesn't know who, like obviously my fame, is not as great as I thought it was, or whatever. So he doesn't even realize that I'm fully, sort of plant-based, that I've done all this research on it, which I think is awesome, because I do get people coming to see me now for that reason specifically. But he's asking me, do you think it'd be all right if I did this thing that they have in the Game Change? And I'm like, yeah, of course it is. That'd be great. And so, but he's coming to me because he wants someone to have the confidence to support him with this, and to say, look, it's okay. It's the right thing to be doing if you want to be doing this. And so I think having the confidence and just taking the time even if it's as simple as just printing out, something like the Daily Dozen or something else that you've got. We've got some really good resources. Shout out for DFN. We've got some practitioner guide resources. We've also got some patient handouts and things that you can download from the website that I think are really great. We've sort of incorporated some of the traffic light stuff, more or less is similar to what we used in the broad study, into that handout too. And there'll be other ones, and I know that a lot of your audience will be in Europe or in Germany, so I'm sure there's stuff that Pan has out there that's in German. And so one of the things I'd love to see as well is like us getting this translated into as many languages as possible as well, that's suited in New Zealand, so that our Maori and Pacific patients, who are some of the ones who need this the most, they have it in a language that they feel comfortable reading and everything too. But even if it's as simple as that, do what you can, and just it can be demoralizing, even coming from me. Like, you'd think, oh, I've done all this stuff, and I get to be a little bit of almost an expert on this now, but it's still not easy, and it's just a matter of sort of keeping your head up and knowing that things are changing and that you can make a difference, and that if you give out 100 pages of Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen or something, and one person comes back who's really taking it on board, that's probably more than you did with those sort of however many patients you saw in between that one person. I really feel like, even though the broad program was so many years ago, and I've seen so many patients since in general practice and things, I feel like I made more of a difference in those. That was a more productive use of my time in the end. And I think sometimes it's about being a little bit brave and realizing what that might be as well for you. And you've talked a little bit about this for yourself, is like, where do you go with this next? Do you go into medicine? And I would encourage you to, if you're doing stuff with Pan, like, if you can make that work for you and that can pay the bills and everything, then I don't think there'd be anything, where you could have a greater impact, to be honest. And that's kind of how I feel a little bit with DFN, right? So I volunteer for them, and I'm on the board of directors for them, and that takes my time. But I think at some stage, we can do things with individual patients, but the wider we can get this message promoted, and the more people that can hear about it, and particularly the more health professionals we can get interested in this, that's really what's going to make the difference. Because every GP might see in a year, they might see 1,000 patients or something, and so if they're mentioning every now and then plant-based to these patients, then that's more than what I can do by sitting with someone one-on-one for some time and discussing everything with them. So I know that's a bit messy. That tends to be how I do things. I don't tend to give sort of one point, or hopefully someone else can break it down a little bit, and sort of hopefully in what I've just said, there's something they can see that they can do. But I'd say don't give up hope. Keep saying this to people. Keep telling your colleagues about it. Provide them with the information they need, and have confidence that we're doing the right thing, and that this is really how we can change our patients' health. And something we didn't get to talk about today, but it's so needed for the planet as well. Yeah. So I think it's just such a win-win for everyone involved, that you really can't do any wrong with this. So just keep doing what you're doing, people. And thanks for everything that you are doing.
That's great, Luke. Thank you for your words, and thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you are doing, that you have done. Thank you so much for doing the broad study, for actually doing the research, for
it was fun.
Putting all that work.
Thanks to the participants, they did the work.
Thanks to the. I mean, this I think continuously participating in the conversation and just continuously bringing this up, and all the other great things, doctors for nutrition and the planetary health aspects. I think. Maybe we'll hit the pause button on this conversation for today, and I'll let you enjoy your evening before your birthday. And maybe you were interested in coming back on the podcast, and we can talk about some of the other aspects, because there's so many different aspects to plant-based nutrition. We can touch on some of the others as well. But
anytime.
Until now, I would really like to thank you so much It was a real pleasure to meet you. Even it was just
too.
online, but it was such a pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, so thank you so much for your time, and thanks so much for being on this
Sure.
podcast. Yeah.
No, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Great.
And thanks for what you're doing to get the word out there. It's awesome.
Okay, so I hope that you had a really good time listening to or watching this podcast. And I also really do hope that you are able to take something away for you from this conversation that you find helpful if you implement it in your daily life, may it be professional or personal. If you're interested in reading the broad study, it's available free online and you can find a link in the description. If you want to learn more about Luke's work, make sure to visit doctorsfornutrition.org, and you can also check out his website at 2zestybananas.com, which to me sounds like one of the greatest names for a website ever. Also, feel free to subscribe to our social media profiles and visit our website at pan-int.org for more great information on nutrition. Thank you for watching or listening. Until next time, I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you soon.